I asked Michael Arndt to sit down with me and discuss some topics under the heading of Ask a Coach. Both Michael and myself are very privileged to be members of the Epic Agile coaching community and tribe. So we've sat down together and talked about 4 items that are really pertinent for us and that have hopefully been pertinent for you guys over the past 8 weeks, where we've all kind of been leaning into this challenge, also known as isolation and COVID-19.
My first question to you, Mr. Arndt, what is the best business agility book you've ever read and why?
That's an interesting question. Thanks for asking, Christian. I think for me, probably one book that's really stuck with me that I read recently whilst on assignment in Singapore was a book called Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. And that book was predominantly about the Iraq War and NATO's engagement in that war, and it talks about how the US Army had to basically completely reinvigorate their armed forces to deal with the Al Qaeda in Afghanistan. Interestingly enough, Al Qaeda in Afghanistan were actually quite an agile organization. There was no leader per se, and it was a very mission-based organization, and they worked in a network of secretive cells. So all the cells knew what the mission was, but how they got there was completely up to them and how they did it. And what the US Army found was it was very difficult to defeat an organization like that, because you take one part out and you just reform in another place. So what they did was the government decided to break down the silos that they had in the US Armed Forces. And the first thing they did was they had a 200 to 300 people stand up each day or each week, which included basically all of the commanders at any level across the engagement. And it was no longer on a needs to know basis, which a lot of the stuff in the armed forces are, where it can be quite secretive. It was more like, how do we work together to solve this problem? And that was really interesting, and that really landed with me.
Yeah, nice. Cool, man. So what was the key takeaway there for you? How did you apply that?
I think the concept around Team of Teams, having mission-based organizations, not just having a hierarchy, and not trying to control, because what they were finding is they couldn't control the organization, and they were losing the battle because of that. So having empowered teams that are aware of the mission, they are set up in a way that they have everything they need as a cross-functional unit to get there. That was the biggest takeaway. I mean, it can be applied anywhere, and it can be applied in a theater of battle where it's life and death and people are dying out there. So whenever someone says to you in an organization or a software team or a HR team trying to do Agile, I can't do that. It's probably prudent to remind them this has been done in a life and death situation, so you can do it.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll share with you my top business agility book of all time is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni.
Cool.
An oldie but a goodie, classic.
The classic like yourself, mate.
It is a classic. Basically, it's a fable. It's a leadership fable about a fictional team, but it's based on a cross section of personalities that you generally find in any workplace. So basically, anyone who reads the book can identify with this dysfunctional team. It's a dysfunctional leadership team. And the Patrick Lencioni uses the fable of this team to introduce the 5 dysfunctions of a team model. Mm-hmm. There's the model there.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, basically the first dysfunction is absence of trust, and that's important because basically without trust, the teams don't have a foundation to build on, and each step in the model leads to the next step. So the next step after lack of trust is fear of conflict. And for me, that makes sense. Like if you don't have trust with your teammates, then you're not going to trust people to disagree and have that healthy tension and conflict and be able to make strong decisions. So teams that suffer from lack of trust leads to fear of conflict, and then they end up with a lack of commitment, because it's hard to commit to something if you haven't had an opportunity to disagree and explore possible options. So teams that haven't explored possible options end up having an inability to commit, and they'll end up in situations where they go, oh yeah, that was your first priority, but that wasn't my first priority because I didn't commit to it. And then lack of commitment leads to avoidance of accountability. So if you haven't bought into a plan, if you haven't bought into a goal, then teams generally end up in a situation where they don't want to be held accountable for something they didn't commit to. which then leads up to inattention to results. So you end up with a dysfunctional team at the end state where they don't hold themselves accountable, and then effectively the results don't matter to them. So I think the other important message that comes out in the book is that all teams are dysfunctional. All human groups are dysfunctional, and it takes continuous energy and continuous effort over time to remain functioning. So when you go through that storming, forming, norming, performing cycle with a team, it's not like a set and forget. You have to come back to it, and you need to reestablish. And when a new team member joins, you need to go back and reestablish that trust, work through conflict, work through commitment, work through accountability, work through attention to results, because each one of those things manifests itself differently in the squad. So yeah, I really like that one.
It's a classic.
It's a good one. Have you read it?
And I haven't. Oh, I think I read the comic book version a couple of years ago, because there's this comic book version, the Japanese comic version. But those lessons they're pretty. I mean, I've seen teams even yesterday I was working with that are the same things happening. So they happen all over the place and consistently.
Yeah, you see it everywhere. You see it with your family, you see it with friends, you see it at work. And it's just really interesting. And I think especially now, the way work has shifted at the moment, it's really interesting to look back through that pyramid and see where different squads could be at, and how we can help them as coaches to move through that cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet, mate.
I've got a question for you. So we're coming up to a large kind of disruption in sprint, probably one of the bigger ones, apart from Christmas break that we have. But it's an awkward disruption, because it's basically 2 days out of the sprint. It's reducing a 2-week sprint to an 8-day instead of a 10-day to an 8-day sprint. So my question to you was, if you were a product owner, how would you manage a disruption?
So first of all, it's hard to deliver end-to-end in a 10-day period, right? So a normal standard 2-week sprint, which generally is what squads use, and it's already challenging to deliver end-to-end solutions in a 10-day period. And the squads that are successful in doing it get a lot of satisfaction out of doing it. So if you take even half a day out of that 10-day mix, it actually causes, like you said, huge disruption. And I also see it as being a bit of a halo effect. So it's not just that you've lost that half a day or 1 day, and in this case it's 2 days. It actually feels like, to me, any amount of time that you lose from a sprint, you should multiply by 2. So if you're actually taking a day out of the sprint, you should say we've actually lost 2 days, and plan around missing 2 days from the sprint. Not to say that you will necessarily lose those 2 days, but if you approach it with that mindset, you start to inject a bit more abundance back into the team's planning and back into the team's way of working, so that they aren't continuously trying to squeeze 10 days worth of work into 9 days. So in this case, they're going down to 8 days. So what I'm saying is, try and plan for 6 days. I'm saying try and plan for 60% of a normal sprint to get done. And generally what I find with squads is, when we do this, they actually end up getting more done. They end up having a better chance of succeeding in the sprint than they would have usually. And as a general rule of thumb, it's also good to do that in a normal sprint. So if your normal sprint is 10 days, it's generally good to leave the squad some buffer, right? Because when we're working with Agile, and when we're working in a framework like Scrum, it's best suited to unpredictable work. So to me, it never makes sense that we say that we've got unpredictable work, and we've got stakeholders that we need to check in with, and that requirements might change throughout the sprint, or acceptance might change throughout the sprint. But yet we don't leave ourselves enough time to actually adapt. So I think for me, it's really important that we do leave ourselves that buffer, so that we actually have the ability to respond to change that happens during the sprint, rather than optimizing the capacity of work that we have planned for ourselves, so that we fully utilize all of those 10 days in our plan.
I think that actually was my third question to you, just on disruption. What do you feel is the right balance of allowable slack? But I think in my own experience, the biggest problem here, when trying to introduce a concept like that, is that teams still strive for efficiency. They're not looking at what value is created as part of an increment, which is like a sprint. So they're always trying to fill the sprint with as much things as they can. Sometimes those things aren't even interrelated. So they're not actually building some kind of conceptual increment of a sprint, which is value. So it's really hard to take teams from that efficiency mindset into more of a value-based mindset. whereas do less but actually do more in terms of value.
Yeah, changing mindset is a really challenging thing, right? Like when we have a mindset, you can have like various different mindsets. Like, and you just named a couple, right? Growth mindset would be another one. Fixed mindset is another one. At the moment, we have a COVID-19 mindset, right? So when we're looking at just normal things that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, we have this mindset where we have to bring COVID-19 into the conversation every time we're thinking about doing anything. And that's a mindset, right? So your mindset, from my experience, is really tied to your learned experience and your values. That efficiency mindset, it ties into your experience and where you've had success in the past, and it also ties into your values. So if you're valuing efficiency, then you're valuing a maximization of getting as much as you can out of every minute that you possibly have. Right? An efficiency mindset leads to things like, well-oiled machine, individualistic behaviors, extrinsic motivation. So, like rewards and incentives are tightly linked to efficiency. Whereas in the agile way of working, I look at it more as a productivity mindset. So we're actually focusing on the algorithm isn't 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = 3, right? So by getting people to work cohesively and collaboratively together, we're actually getting an outcome, because we're not just delivering the maximum amount of work that we can get done in a period of time. We're delivering something that's actually valuable, right? And with an efficiency mindset, you can't guarantee that what you're going to deliver is going to be valuable. With a productivity mindset, that's the focus, right? And if something is valuable to the end user, to the customer, to the stakeholder, to the business, it's exponentially more valuable than just putting a green box in a line on a Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. And interesting that you mentioned those two areas. Efficiency is a learned behavior, but also you need to have the values. You have values for that, or you have values for something else. And it's often difficult to break. There might be people on the team who are a product of the team. They're a product of that environment where they have done efficiency in the past and it worked for them. They understand it. But their values are different from the team's in that they want to do something different, but the team won't let them. So it's kind of, as a coach, it's kind of, it's very important to provide that kind of environment so all people can adopt that growth mindset and the value-based mindset and start thinking differently about how to do things.
Yeah.
So now that we're all remote working from home, my question was, how do you spice up your day? Because for me, I'm sitting on I had a wheelie, like a desk office chair, which broke on my first day of remote working. And then the market for office chairs went nuts after that. It's very hard to find one that's good value. So I'm actually sitting on a hard wooden chair. And for me, it's very uncomfortable. So I'm kind of curious to see what you do to spice your day up at home.
Firstly, a lot of people are calling what we're doing at the moment working from home. But I read this really interesting post on LinkedIn the other day. We're actually not working from home. And it kind of gives people a mixed signal when we talk about we're just working from home. Like we're not. Like globally, everyone is just doing their best to continue their work during a crisis, right? Like this pandemic with COVID-19, it's the same as if you're under attack by a foreign entity, right? And you still got to pay your bills, you still got to feed your children, you still got to educate them, and that's exactly what we're living through at the moment. So in a normal working from home environment situation, like you said, your chair broke, you could go to Officeworks and pick one up. And the nature of this situation that we're currently in is you can't go to Officeworks and just pick up a chair because there's no chairs there in the first place. And going to Officeworks puts you in danger of contracting this virus. So we've got to also we've got to acknowledge that we're working through a crisis at the moment, and all of those things that I just mentioned has a toll and an impact on your mental health, because it's very different just going to Officeworks and picking up a chair. Going to Officeworks to pick up a chair and having to wait in a queue to get in, and being surrounded by other people and being nervous if somebody else is sick, and maybe you're wearing a mask and maybe you aren't, and maybe some people are wearing gloves, and it's all of those things are very strange and very odd to see in an environment where just 4 weeks ago you would have just gone to Officeworks and pick up a chair, right? So for me, how am I spicing it up? There's so many small wins, like without having to commute to work. I get to spend so much more time with my kids. When I have a 15-minute break between meetings or something, instead of just sitting at my desk and clearing out my emails or something, which is what I would usually do at work, I just go out to the pool. I put my feet in the pool, or yesterday we just took the opportunity to soak up some vitamin D, which was pretty awesome. You spice it up by doing a few push-ups or sit-ups or putting on the boxing gloves and doing a couple of rounds on the heavy bag. But I think you gotta just kind of try to find that way to just do it and just make it normal. Because if you make a big deal out of it, and you got a backlog, and you're moving your sticky notes through, I got to spend my 15 minutes for my mental health. I got to spend my 15 minutes getting healthy. Spend my 15 minutes walking around the block. It just feels too forced for me, and that's not how I live my life. And I think just you just got to make the new work environment work for you as best as you can. So we've been working together now for, I don't know, probably just over 6-7 months. So I was going to say, one thing that I've noticed from working with you is that you really thrive in launch environments. So I just wanted to know from a bit of a masterclass, now that I've got you here, what are the steps to launching an agile team?
There's a couple of key ingredients to any successful launch, I feel. Number one is having the right people available to you. And number two is designing an agenda around those people to get the best outcome possible. So when we talk about something in Agile called Inceptions, and I would think maybe a smaller version of Inception is like an ideation, you want to have the key people in the room who can kind of help guide that kickoff for any new product or development. And so this will include a mix of key business stakeholders, people who are financially involved in the outcome of these workshops, people who are paying for them would want to be involved. You obviously want to have any technical representation or leadership. And then last, but probably some of the most important people you need to have around is the people who do the work as well, who are involved in that process of ideating and incepting ideas. So there's a lot of groundwork to do this before you actually even get into a room that would pre-qualify this as being successful. And the first thing obviously is time, the people, the right people. And then the third thing probably is a space for those guys to work out of. And once you get there to the room, I think this is where it really kind of comes to light, and you just need to effectively facilitate the right discussions, keep it moving, and hopefully come out with some kind of backlog of work that you can start working on.
What's the energy like in a Inception?
So I've been in various length Inception. So the longest Inception I've ever done was 2 weeks, and that included, in the second week, there was 2 half days. So it was about a 9-day Inception. And that was full on. That was very exhausting, and we were away from home at the time when we did that as coaches. So that was it was really took it out of us, but also took it out of the people in the room. As a facilitator and an organizer before this Inception, there was a lot of groundwork. Like I said, we had to get ready for this to work, but also there's a lot of active facilitation and coaching for outcomes, which can be quite tiring. But the people themselves in the room, they were probably more physically exhausted than we were, and mentally exhausted, because of the kind of questions we would ask of them, and the knowledge that was required for them to really sit on and think about and incubate during that time was very intense. So there's a lot of effort required to kind of get these things going. But I've been in shorter ideations for a day or so. I would probably say a day is not enough time to do it. You probably need at least a couple of days, at least 2 days, I would say, to get it to get to a point where you comfortably have some idea of a skeleton backlog, like a story map that you can go away and work from.
I'm also interested, like, what's the size of a initiative that needs a 2-week Inception?
I would say for a completely greenfield spin up. So if you're spinning up something from scratch, they're the kind of things that require a longer kind of Inception, because you're looking into architectural changes. You're looking into potential, obviously large business changes in the organization when you're spinning these things up. They're completely greenfield. So there's a lot of impacts on technical and business sides when you're doing this kind of thing. And usually, well, not usually, sometimes there might be quite a little bit of risk involved. But obviously there's a big investment in these greenfield initiatives. So the more new it is to an organization, I'd say the longer you need to incept it.
What are the top 5 things that you need for for a Inception to be successful? Like if someone's coming along to a Michael Arndt Inception,
Yep.
What can they expect?
Yep, cool. All right, so there's a couple of really key things you need to have in Inceptions. The first one is you'll need some kind of direction from someone who's, there needs to be some kind of leader in the room, someone who's directing this, someone who wants to get something out of it. And out of that, hopefully you'll have some goals which should abide by you, so like a vision. And then from there, there's a couple of things you can do after that. So there'll be an overall goal as an organization you want to achieve, and then you'll have certain people within that group who are leading the charge like a product owner. And those product owners will then create a vision, or you'll co-create a vision as a group of how do we create a vision which will meet these goals. From there, it's all about conceptualizing the idea a little bit more. So there's a couple of techniques you can use just to get everyone on the same page. It's really important in these times with so many different people from different walks of life in the room, is that you get them on the same page in the room. That's the whole point of Inceptions. So that when you walk away from there, everyone understands what's going to come first and when it will come. So one other thing you can do is something like an elevator pitch, which they're quite old now, but they're very useful. So you just get everyone on the same page, literally. An elevator pitch is a quick way of doing that. The concept behind elevator pitches are if you got into a lift with a CEO and he asked you what your idea was, you could sell it to him on a page in 6 or 7 lines. So it's important that we do that activity so everyone understands firstly what the goals are, where we're going. Everyone understands what the vision might look like of what we want to achieve, and then people start with the actual the pitch of what that might include. And from there, we can start to break this down into traditionally, if you look at a user perspective, you can break it down into like a user flow of how a customer might move through a system. And we can take these as high-level themes, and from there we can work on these themes to get more flesh on the bones of what that might look like as a backlog of work. But it's key as a facilitator during these times that when you start moving into more detail, that everything always satisfies the goal. So the goal is it's a fantastic mechanism. Usually it can be written on 2 Post-it notes, but it's a fantastic mechanism for realigning everyone very quickly. So if there's disagreement in the room about whether something should be included or not, you just point at the goal and say, does it satisfy this? If it doesn't, then obviously not. If it does it satisfy it right now, or does it satisfy it later? And then the output of this towards the end is getting some kind of story map where you can go away and you can start work immediately.
Well, I think it's been awesome chatting to you, man. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Really,
enjoyed it.